The phone rang, and the sound echoed in my mind with cruel precision, reminding me of every moment of those last few weeks. On the other end of the line, her voice responded, hesitantly, as if she wasn't sure what to expect. I said, bluntly, the divorce is on the way. The silence that followed was deafening, and for the first time in years, I could feel his shock, his desperate attempt to compose himself, even though she was there, beside him. Yes, I knew. I knew about the secret meetings, the excuses for last-minute trips, the evasive smiles that I pretended not to notice. I knew everything, and, at that moment, I realized that my world would never be the same again. There were years of careful construction, of bonds that I believed were unbreakable, of promises we made to each other. But at some point, that was no longer enough for her. What was once a partnership became a game, a cruel game in which I, without knowing it, was the only one following the rules. She lived two lives and, at the same time, kept me in a dark room of promises and oaths, while smiling with someone else. On the outside, we were the perfect couple. Friends, family, everyone saw us as a unit, a fortress, but I, at that moment, already knew that this was just a facade. It was a close friend who alerted me, making me awaken to something that I insisted on ignoring. He told me, with a seriousness that left me uneasy, that there was something strange about her excuses, about the subtle changes that went unnoticed in everyday life. I started to notice. Observing departure times, noticing the perfume on clothes that shouldn't be impregnated with a fragrance that wasn't mine. They were small details, but like sparks in a dry forest, they soon ignited a truth I never wanted to face. And then I saw her. There she was, sitting in a discreet cafe, as if that meeting was something casual, as if he were just one face among many. But I knew. She didn't know I was watching, and it was in that moment that something inside me broke forever. It was no longer possible to ignore it. What was before my eyes was living proof of what my heart feared, and yet, as I approached, I maintained my composure. I waited. I waited for the right moment to act, and now, here he was, within my reach, just a phone call away. She was speechless when she heard the sentence come out of my mouth. Divorce. The same divorce she never expected to hear, that perhaps she thought she could avoid. And even as I pronounced each syllable firmly, the cruelest part of the revelation was yet to come. I knew she was there, beside him, that she had turned off all her defenses and surrendered to what had destroyed us. But I didn't know that this was just the beginning of your punishment. Every word I said was like a blade, cutting deep into something she, perhaps, wasn't prepared to lose. And the irony was that I wouldn't have to lift a finger for his world to come crashing down. It was she herself who lit the fuse of her own destruction. That call was just the first step. When I hung up the phone, I had something in my hands that would change everything. On the screen, every message, every photo, every exchange of intimate words that she thought was safely hidden. I didn't need to act in a hurry, because I knew that, soon, she would understand what I knew, what I had seen, what I kept with me. I didn't know how far this would go, but I felt, within me, a kind of cold calm. It was almost serene knowing that she was about to face the reflection of her choices, to reap every bit of what she had sown. And while she thought the shock of my answer on the phone was the worst that could happen, little did she know what awaited her. All the confidence, all the image she cherished was about to be crushed before everyone's eyes. I had the power to destroy, and this time, she would be the one to see every detail revealed to the world, the same world she so ardently pretended to keep intact. Welcome to the channel. Here, we never support or encourage any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, created to show how betrayal destroys lives, corrupts trust and undermines relationships. Get ready, because what comes next is an intense narrative, full of twists and turns and raw emotions. Good story, and be ready for something really shocking. Jack watched the skyline from the large office window, watching the Boston sunset paint the city with orange tones. That moment at the end of the day, with the office empty and the last rays of sunlight illuminating his space, was one of the few moments of peace he felt lately. The last few months had been a whirlwind, not only because of the work routine, but also because of the constant feeling that something was escaping him, something subtle and unsettling. Jack was a successful man, owner of a consulting firm and known for his professional commitment. In everyone's eyes, he had a life that many would envy, married to Helen, a charming and intelligent woman, with whom he had shared a solid history for almost 2 decades, full of complicity. Helen was the type of person who, wherever she was, attracted attention with her natural grace and self-confidence. Journalist and columnist for a highly prestigious magazine, Helen had built an admirable career, balancing her passion for work with her role as a wife. The house she shared with Jack was a carefully decorated haven, a cozy home that conveyed the harmony and balance they both projected. Their relationship seemed, in the eyes of friends and family, almost perfect. They were the couple everyone wanted to be. However, behind this facade, Jack felt that a shadow was beginning to loom. He didn't know exactly when this feeling had arisen, but it was like an icy breeze that slowly gained strength. Helen, previously expansive and dedicated to moments together, seemed, lately, more distant. He noticed the small changes, her gaze that moved away during conversations, the silences that prolonged, the less frequent smiles. When they got married, they vowed to support each other, to be companions in all challenges. And for many years, they had lived exactly that way, sharing dreams, ambitions and a deep love. But now, Helen seemed to have a universe of her own, something beyond what they shared, a mystery that Jack couldn't solve. These changes did not go unnoticed by Jack, who tried to rationalize. He believed that it could just be the natural wear and tear of routine. After all, time took its toll, and life was not always made up of moments of intense passion and euphoria. But the feeling that something essential was out of place was like a wound he couldn't ignore. He remembered the nights of deep conversations they used to have, the spontaneous trips and the shared laughter. Now, these moments were just memories of a phase that seemed to be increasingly distant. And, in the silence of the early mornings, Jack found himself wondering, could the love that brought them together still endure? Helen, in turn, also felt the weight of this transformation. Inside, he was fighting a restlessness that he couldn't define clearly. She had everything she ever wanted, a loving husband, a career she was proud of, and a seemingly stable life. But something inside her pushed her beyond this stability, a desire for something more, for something new that she herself didn't fully understand. This need, initially vague, had grown, taking shape in her thoughts and creating a distance between her and Jack that she didn't know how to explain. Helen's days were busy between the magazine and social commitments, and, in her work, she was known for her talent in understanding the complexity of the topics she covered. The interviews, the texts she wrote and the constant interaction with people from different worlds made her feel alive. And, even though she loved the life she had with Jack, she missed something that she didn't even know how to define. Helen kept this dilemma a secret, preferring to deal alone with these emotions that appeared unexpectedly. In an attempt to reconnect with him, Helen suggested they take a weekend to travel together. They went to a small coastal town, where they used to go in the first years of their marriage. It was an attempt to rescue what seemed to be fading, to rekindle the feeling that once seemed unshakable. Jack accepted the idea enthusiastically, hopeful that time together would dispel the clouds gathering in their relationship. They spent pleasant days, remembering stories and happy moments, but, deep down, Jack felt that that experience was just an attempt to make up something that was perhaps more compromised than he would like to admit. Helen, in turn, tried, in every way, to convince herself that that effort was enough, that they could still live as before. The couple's friends, many of whom were also in long-term marriages, did not understand the nuances of what was going on. In fact, many did not even imagine that anything could be wrong. At parties and meetings, Jack and Helen still kept up appearances, exchanging knowing looks and words of affection. But what no one knew was that those gestures were beginning to lose the authenticity that had characterized them for so many years. For Jack, the challenge was dealing with a silent pain, a sense of gradual loss that he didn't know how to stop. And, for Helen, the challenge was to live with a kind of guilt and emptiness, which became more intense every day. When they returned from the trip, Helen seemed more reserved, and Jack increasingly introspective. The silent nights returned, and conversations became monosyllabic. The connection that had once been so natural and spontaneous now felt like a chore. Jack tried to find answers to what could have changed between them, while Helen was torn between the familiarity of marriage and the attraction of something new that she didn't even know what it was, but that attracted her irresistibly. And it was in this context of uncertainty and doubt that something invisible began to emerge between them, a shadow that hid between the lines of their conversations, that remained in the averted gazes, that echoed in the silences of the early morning. Work had become Jack's refuge, an escape where he could feel still useful, still in control. He spent more and more time in the office, immersing himself in reports and strategies. Every night he returned late was a small relief, an excuse not to face the emptiness that seemed to grow between him and Helen. She, on the other hand, also immersed herself more and more in her activities, filling her calendar with events and projects that kept her busy and gave her a feeling of freedom, even if momentary. Between them, what was once a home now seemed like a minefield, where any word or gesture could trigger a conflict that they both avoided. The holidays were approaching, and Jack decided to make an extra effort to try to recover what he felt was being lost. He planned a celebration at home, bringing together some close friends and family, with the aim of bringing some lightness to the tense atmosphere that dominated his relationship with Helen. The evening was pleasant, filled with laughter and warm conversations. Everyone seemed pleased, except Jack, who, as he watched Helen, felt that she was distant, even with everyone around her. It was as if there was an invisible barrier between them, a layer of ice that he didn't know how to break. After the party, while they were putting away the last dishes in the kitchen, Jack tried to get closer to her, touch her hands, seeking a contact that he felt he had lost for a long time. She smiled, but the smile wasn't enough to disguise the discomfort she felt. They both knew something was out of place, but neither of them seemed willing to face what that really meant. The words remained suspended in the air, and the attempt at closeness dissipated in the silence of the kitchen, where only the noise of the dishes resounded. That night, as he lay down, Jack stared at the ceiling, lost in thought, while Helen fell asleep next to him, apparently oblivious to the whirlwind of emotions taking over him. It was as if their marriage was now a play, where they both acted with precision, but without the passion and authenticity of before. Jack didn't know how far this would go, but deep down he knew something needed to change. And he also knew that wherever this change took them, there would be no turning back. Jack felt the weight of the days piling up on his shoulders, like a constant, disturbing shadow that he didn't know how to shake. What was once a vague suspicion now took shape, hardening his thoughts and growing in his mind like a painful certainty. He began to notice details that might have seemed inconsequential before, but now piled up like pieces of a puzzle. Helen was more absent, involved in commitments she didn't usually have and disconnected from moments they used to share. The way she avoided his gaze, the smiles that seemed distant and the way her cell phone was never far from her. Every detail was like a whisper that something was terribly wrong. Jack's tiredness turned into constant restlessness, and he could no longer ignore it. The nights became increasingly lonely, even when Helen was next to him in bed. Her body seemed present, but her mind, he knew, was distant, lost somewhere he couldn't reach. It was a silent but screaming abyss that stretched between them. Jack realized that the relationship was no longer the same, and the idea that she could be with someone else began to invade his mind, gaining strength with every detail he noticed. On one of these nights, while Helen said that she would need to travel to cover a last-minute event, Jack found himself overcome by an anguish that he could no longer suppress. The excuse was convincing, but something about her expression made him uneasy. Still, he watched her as she got ready, hurriedly packing her suitcase and checking her cell phone for messages with a frequency he hadn't seen in years. He tried to push away the doubt, fight the instinct that screamed for him to question it, but he said nothing. She kissed him automatically, murmuring that she would be back in a few days, and left. Jack stood in the doorway, watching her car disappear, with a feeling of emptiness that seemed to envelop everything around him. The days that followed were silent and long, marked by the weight of memories that insisted on returning. He remembered when they first met, the way she made him laugh, the endless conversations that seemed to last all night. But now, that woman he loved so much seemed like an enigma, someone he no longer recognized. One morning, he decided to take an action that, until then, he had been reluctant to consider. He called an old friend who worked as a private investigator, someone he trusted to uncover the truth, no matter how painful. As his friend accepted the task, Jack felt guilty, somehow betraying the trust they once had. But it was inevitable. The truth was his only way out, and he needed to confront it, whatever it was. Days passed in a mix of anxiety and regret as he waited for the news that could change everything. He pretended that everything was normal, but the small details continued to show themselves, the different perfume, the distance in hugs, and the way she always seemed to be in a hurry to leave the house. That week, Helen returned from her trip, and instead of any joy at the reunion, Jack felt only a growing disconnection. She smiled, said she was exhausted, and then retired to her room, claiming she needed to rest. Jack watched every gesture, every word, and the certainty of betrayal seemed more and more palpable. He knew it was only a matter of time before something more concrete emerged. It was at the end of that week that the friend sent him a message, asking them to meet in person. Jack felt his stomach turn when he read the message, but agreed, meeting him at a discreet cafe. His friend arrived with an envelope in hand and a serious expression, without disguising the weight of the discoveries. "I'm sorry, Jack, but I think you need to see this," he said, handing him the envelope. Jack opened the envelope with shaking hands as his heart hammered in his chest. Photos of Helen on discreet dates, walking hand in hand with a man he had never seen. Jack couldn't contain his shock when he saw the images, which were indisputable proof that his worst fears had been confirmed. Each photograph was a blow that shattered what was left of his confidence, and he felt a mixture of anger and disbelief. How had Helen gotten to this point? How could someone he had built a whole life with so openly betray everything they had? But, even in the face of all that, Jack remained silent. He knew that confronting her right now would be a hasty choice. Instead, he decided to watch more closely, wait for the right moment to face the truth head-on. The nights that followed were tormenting. He lay next to her, knowing that the touch, the smile, everything was just an illusion. And Helen seemed even more distant, lost in thoughts that he now knew weren't about him. One day, while at home, Helen was getting ready to go out, mentioning an appointment with friends, something that Jack already knew wasn't true. He watched her every gesture with almost surgical attention, feeling his heart tighten with the weight of the situation. When she finally left, he waited a few minutes and decided to follow her. There was an urgency to know how far she would go, how far that lie was established. He saw her stop at an inconspicuous restaurant, and then, when a man walked in and greeted her with a warm hug, something snapped inside him. That was the same man from the photos. This was the man who took his place, who shared moments with the woman he thought was only his. Jack watched from afar, in disbelief, every gesture, every smile, and a feeling of deep betrayal settled in his chest. In that moment, Jack felt as if he were viewing his own life from the outside, like a spectator at a cruel and sordid spectacle. He never imagined he would one day be in that position, but there he was, watching the destruction of everything he believed in. He withdrew silently, without making any noise, without interfering, but with his heart devastated by the realization of the betrayal. Jack stood his ground, even as pain and outrage ate every fiber of his being. The night before had been a real ordeal, and he had barely slept, trying to absorb every detail of what he had discovered. But that morning, after hours of staring at the ceiling of his empty room, Jack made a decision. The pain was still there, latent and uncomfortable, but something had changed. He wasn't just going to confront her, he needed something more, he needed to understand the reason behind that devastating betrayal. It wasn't just a matter of hurt pride, he wanted answers, he wanted to expose what was hidden. When Helen returned, he was already ready, waiting in the living room, where a cold gloom permeated the space. The sound of the door opening was followed by her hesitant steps when she saw him sitting there, as if he was waiting for her. She noticed the tension in his face, and his eyes wavered, as if he sensed something terrible was coming. "We need to talk, Helen," he said, his voice firm but with a note of exhaustion. He was looking at her with a seriousness that made her shudder. Helen tried to smile, an attempt at normality that soon fell apart in the face of the gravity of the moment. She sat down on the couch across from him, her shaking hands finding themselves in her lap. "Of course, Jack, what happened?" Her voice carried a hesitation, and Jack didn't need anything else to confirm that she knew exactly what he was talking about. "I know everything." The words came out bluntly, direct and raw, hitting Helen like a blow. She opened her mouth, but no words escaped. Her face lost color, and her eyes widened, betraying surprise and terror. Jack continued, his tone revealing an almost threatening calm. "You thought I'd never find out, didn't you? But here I am, sitting across from the woman who promised loyalty and yet betrayed me." Helen felt trapped, her heart beating wildly, as if she wanted to escape the situation. She looked away, taking a deep breath, while a tear insisted on welling up. "Jack," she searched for words that could alleviate the situation, but nothing seemed enough. "I just want to understand, Helen," Jack said, voice hoarse with emotional exhaustion. "I want to understand why. Did you even think about what it would do to us?" The silence between them was almost palpable, an emptiness that seemed to grow and swallow any possibility of return. Helen took a deep breath, finding the strength to face the truth that she could no longer hide. I don't know what to say, Jack. Nothing I say will justify what I did." "Then why?" Jack pressed, the intensity in his gaze seeming to pierce through her. "I want to hear it from your mouth." She looked away again, swallowing hard before speaking, as if the words that would come out of her mouth were a poison she feared releasing. "I didn't plan for things to come to this, Jack. It was something that just happened. I felt alone, you were always busy, always immersed in work, and I got lost." Helen's voice trailed off, and she wiped away a tear that had escaped her eye. "But that doesn't justify it. Nothing justifies it." Jack watched her, his face impassive, but with his eyes overflowing with deep sadness. "You betrayed me, Helen. Not with just any man, but with someone who is part of our life. Was this supposed to be revenge? Is this what you wanted?" Helen's eyes widened, shaking her head vigorously. "No, Jack, it was never about revenge. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to feel something different. Something that would remind me of who I was before all this." Jack sighed, running his hands over his face, exhausted and not knowing if he would ever be able to understand what she was trying to justify. Her every word sounded hollow, unable to repair the damage that was already done. "Was it that easy for you?" Jack asked, his voice slightly cracking. "You looked at me, slept next to me, while hiding this secret. And I, like a fool, believed everything. I believed we still had a chance to fix whatever was wrong." Helen lowered her head, unable to meet Jack's gaze. She knew that no matter what words she chose, the impact of the betrayal had already become irreversible. However, she could not remain silent, even if every word came out as a painful confession. "I know I made a mistake. I know I destroyed the trust you placed in me, and I know that nothing I say will erase what I did. But I still love him, Jack." Helen's words came out in a whisper, but the sincerity in her voice was undeniable. Jack, however, no longer knew how to react. The revelation had devastated him, but Helen's final words hit him like a final blow. He got up, feeling that he needed to get out of there, that the air had become too suffocating to continue in that environment. He stopped for a moment, looking at her one last time. "You say you still love me, but where was that love when you chose to betray me? He asked, almost as if speaking to himself. Love is not an excuse, Helen. Love is a commitment. And you broke ours in ways I never imagined possible. Before Helen could respond, Jack left the room, leaving her alone, shrouded in the shadow of her own choices. Jack left the house aimlessly, plunged into an oppressive void. The cold of the night enveloped him, but it was unable to compete with the icy sensation that coursed through his veins. His mind echoed Helen's words, which seemed to dance cruelly in his head. The love she claimed to still feel for him felt like a burden, a bitter irony in the face of the devastating betrayal that had revealed itself. Everything he believed, all the meaning he saw in the life built alongside her, now seemed like a lie, an illusion carefully woven and mercilessly broken. He walked aimlessly through the streets, passing unfamiliar faces and everyday scenes unfolding around him. It was as if the world continued on its way, indifferent to what he felt. The contrast between the chaos in his mind and the tranquility of his surroundings intensified his pain. He couldn't stop thinking about the nights she had been by his side, the smiles that seemed sincere, the vows of love that now seemed empty. It was as if Helen were a stranger, someone he had never really met. Finally, he found a bench in the park and sat down, trying to assimilate the whirlwind of emotions that consumed him. Memories invaded his mind, an incessant flow that brought him both comfort and pain. Every detail seemed to torture him, the way she smiled, the sound of her laugh, the moments of complicity they had shared. He had always believed that these moments formed the foundation of his life, but now everything felt fragile and shifting, as if it had been built on quicksand. As he struggled to maintain some sense of clarity, Jack found himself confronted by an immense moral dilemma. Part of him wanted to confront Helen again, demand answers he might never get. The other, more tormented part wondered if he really wanted to maintain any connection with someone who had hurt him so deeply. Jack had always believed in the power of forgiveness, but there, at that moment, he realized that forgiveness required a strength he didn't have. The betrayal had torn him apart in a way he had never imagined possible. Helen, in turn, was left alone in the room, paralyzed by the weight of her actions. As she watched him leave, a feeling of absolute despair came over her. Jack was, despite everything, the man she loved, the man who had accompanied her at every stage of her life, the partner with whom she shared dreams and failures, successes and fears. Seeing that love disappear before her eyes was an indescribable pain, an emptiness that she knew she could never fill. The guilt that gnawed at her was accompanied by an overwhelming sense of loss, and she wondered if she could ever forgive herself. Hours later, Helen tried to sleep, but sleep didn't come. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to find some ray of hope in the chaos she found herself in. She knew that her mistake was a choice, a decision that now condemned her to endless suffering. But more than anything, she knew that the trust Jack had placed in her was something she would never be able to get back. The weight of this knowledge was an almost unbearable burden. The next morning, Jack returned home in silence, tired and dejected. His eyes were empty, as if a part of him had died the night before. Helen approached, hesitantly, trying to find some spark of understanding in his gaze. But he ignored her, moving through the house like a ghost. The silence between them was thick, an insurmountable barrier that grew larger by the second. Days passed in this dark routine, where each person lived in their own universe, unable to reach the other. Jack kept himself busy at work, searching in his frantic pace for some form of anesthesia. He spent extra hours at the office, avoiding as much as possible the return home that now seemed like a burden. Helen, on the other hand, remained in the house, immersed in a consuming feeling of guilt. She avoided any contact with her friends, aware that the revelation of her betrayal could spread at any moment, further destroying what was left of her image. On one such night, as Jack was preparing to sleep in the guest room, Helen entered the room. Her presence bothered him, but he remained silent, hoping she would say something that could somehow ease the weight in his heart. "Jack," Helen began, her voice low and shaky. "I know nothing I say will make up for what I did, but I need you to know that I'm truly sorry. Nothing can justify what happened. But please believe me, I regret it. Jack looked at her for a long moment, his face impassive, before responding, his voice filled with deep tiredness. Repentance, Helen, does not undo what you have done. You chose to betray me, and that was your choice, not mine. What did you expect me to do now? Pretend nothing happened? She tried to get closer, but he retreated, creating a distance that seemed insurmountable. Jack continued, I wanted a life with you, Helen. I wanted us to grow old together, to have a shared future. But you threw it all away. He stopped, as if the words were escaping him. Now, there is nothing left. I don't know who you are. And honestly, I don't even think you know. Helen felt a lump tighten in her throat, tears beginning to roll down her face. I know I lost your respect and your love. I know I was wrong in a way that may never be repaired. But please, Jack, tell me what I can do. I would do anything to fix this. Jack laughed, a bitter laugh, which demonstrated all the irony and absurdity of the situation. To repair? He repeated, with an incredulity that left her paralyzed. Helen, you broke something that can't be fixed. Trust, respect, loyalty. These are not things that can be glued back together. You chose the path that brought us here. Silence settled in again, heavy and absolute. Jack turned away, ending the conversation once and for all. Helen left the room, feeling devastated, as if she had been drained of all hope. That night, they both slept poorly, each in their own solitude, wrapped up in the consequences of what had happened. In the days that followed, Jack reflected on the future. The idea of divorce, which had previously seemed impossible, now gained strength in his mind. He found himself thinking about freedom, about the possibility of starting over in a place where there were no shadows of betrayal. Jack knew that by cutting the tie that bound him to Helen, he might finally be able to free himself from the suffering she had caused him. Helen, in turn, struggled with the fear of permanent loss. She knew that if Jack made that decision, she would never return to the life she knew. More than that, she knew that she would have to live with the burden of her choices, which would accompany her wherever she went. And, even in the face of the abyss in which she found herself, Helen continued to nurture a vague hope, a naive belief that, perhaps, time could repair the pain. One night, as Jack was preparing to sleep once again in the guest room, Helen appeared at the door. This time, she didn't say anything, just stood there, looking lost and tired. Jack watched her for a few moments, and for the first time, he realized that her suffering was also genuine. This didn't lessen the pain he felt, but it made him question the reasons that had led them there. Why, Helen? He asked, almost like a whisper, more to himself than to her. Why did you destroy everything we had? She didn't respond right away, just lowered her head, unable to look at him. However, after a long silence, he finally said, because I didn't know who I was anymore, Jack. And in trying to figure it out, I missed what mattered most. I lost myself, and I lost you. Time passed, and both Jack and Helen continued to live under the weight of the choices they had made and the words they had said. Jack finally made the decision to formalize the divorce. That day, he walked to the law firm handling the case, delivering the final documents with surprising calm. The feeling of freedom he longed for was still tempered by pain, but now he knew that this was what was necessary to move forward. He would move to a new apartment, and there he would rebuild a life where he could find the peace he had lost. For Helen, divorce meant the final confrontation with the consequences of betrayal. When she received the papers, reality set in with a brutality that left her breathless. She kept the house, but the place now seemed empty, marked by memories of a marriage that had been destroyed. All the photos, the furniture, the objects that previously told the story of a solid love, now seemed to be witnesses of its loneliness. Helen's days became a silent routine, marked by regrets and intense longing. She reflected on everything she had done, trying to understand where, in her eagerness to rediscover herself, she had lost so much. His work continued, but it no longer gave him the same meaning. The moments of euphoria that had once enchanted her had dissipated, and she felt like a shadow, an empty reflection of who she once was. Jack, in turn, began to find a new perspective. Over time, his pain turned into learning, and he discovered a strength he had never explored in himself. He dedicated himself to traveling, seeing new places, making connections that he hadn't had time to cultivate before. His travels were a means of rediscovery, a chance to start over far from the remnants of his past life. With each new destination, he left behind a little more bitterness and allowed a new sense of freedom to envelop him. However, an unexpected encounter changed the course of both their lives. One rainy night, Jack was in a cozy cafe, waiting for a friend he had arranged to meet. As he settled down and ordered a coffee, he heard a familiar voice. It was Helen, who, without noticing her presence, entered the same cafe. Upon noticing his presence, she hesitated, but something in her eyes indicated that she needed to talk to him. Jack, with unexpected serenity, motioned for her to sit down. They stared at each other in silence, and Helen, for the first time since the divorce, felt she needed to open up honestly. "I never imagined we would meet here. I don't know what you think, but I just wanted to tell you." Jack raised his hand, stopping her. "It is no longer necessary, Helen. I understood everything I needed. There is nothing more that can be said that will change the past." She took a deep breath, nodding. But something persisted in her, a last need to expose what she had kept. "Still, I need to tell you that I never stopped loving you. And perhaps that is my greatest punishment, knowing that I lost you, by my own choice, and having to live with that." Jack looked at her with an unreadable expression. Those words, although sincere, were no longer capable of changing what he had decided for himself. Somewhere along his journey, he had found the peace of leaving the past where it belonged. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and replied with a serenity that surprised them both, "I loved you too, Helen. And for a long time, it kept me stuck in what we could have been. But now, I need to follow, and I want you to do the same." Helen lowered her head, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. She knew this was a final goodbye, that any chance of rebuilding had dissipated. Jack had forgiven her, but that forgiveness didn't mean a fresh start, it meant he was ready to move on, leaving her behind. After that meeting, Helen found herself facing a new reality. She started working on projects that involved other aspects of her life, trying to give everything a new meaning. "I tried to compensate, in every small action, for the emptiness I felt." But deep down, she knew that the choices she made had shaped her destiny, and no matter how much she sought new directions, regret would always accompany her. Jack, finally free, found in his new life what he had always been looking for, a sincere new beginning in the peace he so desired. He learned to value himself, to know himself fully and to understand the true meaning of trust and loyalty, values that he would carry forever. On his travels, he met people who inspired him, who taught him to see life from new perspectives. And, little by little, he found space to open his heart again, without the wounds of the past. For Helen, time brought the realization of the impact of her choices and the acceptance that some wounds, no matter how much they heal, leave eternal marks. And Jack, moving forward, discovered that self-love and peace are the true foundations of a fulfilling life. If you've made it this far, leave your thoughts on the story in the comments. We want to know your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more stories like this. Remembering that here, we never support betrayal, these stories are just a reflection on the devastating consequences they can have on people's lives.